Look, it wasn't an easy decision, I think. I still look back right now and I sometimes ask myself, what was I thinking, right? But yeah, it wasn't an easy decision. I mean, like leaving your loved ones, friends, family, everything in behind and moving to a country which was stationed at, no one. I mean, like it's difficult enough for me to live in Mpumalanga and come all the way to the Western Cape for me to study. But for me to now pack my bags and pack my entire life to move to a different jurisdiction, that was a hard decision. But I think in the long run, I knew the benefits in me doing that. And beside the craving within me of wanting to do it and try it, I think it was also that feeling of, I want to test myself against the best. I want to see whether I can survive or I can do it or I can make it in an international market or in a much bigger banking and finance market, right? Because with all due respect, most of the time it's the US, London, Australia, and South Africa. I will put South Africa as one of the best banking and finance jurisdictions, if you ask me. So that was that as well, like improving my skills as well as a lawyer. Because I think the learning never stops. You forever be learning. I'm still learning at this point in time, even now, right? So it was that. It was a combination of a lot of things. I think it was a combination of wanting to try it out, wanting to stay abroad as well, but also wanting to uplift my skills, but also to just double check my skill level as to can I do it? Can I do it? And that's where the journey started.
Thank you for coming, Tshepo.
Thank you for having me, Jacob.
It's always appreciation to sit down and have these type of conversations. So, for the people who are listening to us for the first time, would you please tell them who you are, just a little bit?
Well, thank you first of all for having me. Name is Tshepo, as you have introduced me. Born and raised in Mpumalanga. I'm a brother, I'm a son, recently became a husband. Went to school in Mpumalanga, the township that I was raised. And then after high school, I went straight to UWC and studied LLB in 2012. Completed my matric in 2011 and went to study LLB in 2012 at UWC. And then straight after that, I was lucky enough to start my employment with Bowmans in Joburg, Senton. And then from there, was retained as an attorney in the banking and finance department at Bowmans in Senton. And from there, currently, I'm practicing banking and finance as well in Australia. So yeah, that's a bit of Tshepo.
All right. So you mentioned that you studied law at UWC, and that you got into Bowmans. So the question that I have first is how did you do it? How did you get into Bowmans for a kid or someone out there listening? Because it's one of the top law firms in Africa.
Yeah, it's quite a process, to be honest. It's not initially what they used to do, right? They used to just call you in, interview, and then, hey, by the way, you have articles, or we can't offer you articles. And then prior to that, what they did is that they changed the whole selection process at Bowmans, where it became a selection process over 2 days. So when I was in Cape Town, then I started applying, I think, in my second year. Because I think at that time it was very competitive, and as we all know that there's literally law students graduating every single year in South Africa, and there's not enough law firms out there to actually absorb all of us. So the big firms, or the big five firms as they're known in South Africa, what they normally do is that they started recruiting probably 3-4 years before then. I know that the people in my year at UWC that had articles already in their second year. So if you think about it, I probably started a bit late to start studying the whole process. So I started applying, I think, in my second year, went to a few interviews, went to Cliff Decker, Weber Fentel, and then Bowmans as well. So Bowmans, they do this, as I said, do the selection over 2 days, period of 2 days, which consists of a lot of activities within the 2 days. It's interviews, group interviews, individual interviews, and of course within that is also like activities that they expect you to do. Where I think one of the ones that we did was a summary of a case. We had to summarize a case, read a case, and summarize it. So after that, then you go away, and then they basically give you guys like reports whether you actually whether they're offering you articles or not. Funny enough, I was actually coming back from a shower. I was back on campus, and when I received the call from the HR personnel that actually gave me a call, and that was it. I think the journey started from there. I guess. Well, if you think about it, journey probably started in 2012 when I was still a first year student at UWC. So I think I was lucky enough, and the reason why I say I was lucky enough is because if you look at the volume of applications that law firms receive, like for example, when I was already at Bowmans, when I was told that how many people actually applied at the same time as me, it's thousands of people, and then from there they only choose like 20 people to attend that 2-day selection process. So that's where it started. That's how I got articles at Bowmans in my third year.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the one thing I think that cannot be overlooked, and since I know you personally, is the amount of hard work that you put in terms of academic, but also personal development.
Yeah.
So it's not just about applying. There is other things that you have to do.
Yep.
So can you please tell people what is those things that you put in place to actually set you up for a chance at Bowmans?
Look, I think I had a very good system going. Probably not as good as probably my first year as I would have liked, but you know what, I made it, and that was the most important thing. And then from there, I think in my second year, when I saw how people were working so hard, people were on Dean's list, people were in the top 40, top 20 at UWC. Because if you think about it, in our first year, there was probably like, I think there was so many of us in a sense that people attending classes or lectures will actually end up having to sit on the stage. That's how full a lecture hall is. And if you know the lecture halls at UWC, you know how big they are. So to be part of a top 40 for my first year results, that for me was a very good achievement. But at the same time, it actually showed me that how much I had to work to be in the top 10, in the top 40, in the top 20 in my year, and also be in the Dean's list. That's how competitive my year was. And I think what I did in my second year I did well was that I had very good people around me. I think a good crowd, if you want to put it like that, from an academic perspective. But also at the same time that people that shared the same sentiments in terms of where we wanted to go with our academics and what we wanted to do with our LLBs. So I think surrounding yourself with good people around you, people with good marks, people who inspire to be something and do something bigger with their LLBs actually helped me to actually broaden my own thinking as well. And then at the same time, I joined the PMP program as well, peer mentoring program. In my second year, I was a mentor then. I think that laid a very good foundation. I think from a confidence perspective, and I think and also from like learning a lot of things that I didn't know that I was capable of. For example, leadership skills, or also being like a very thinking broadly, you know, because most of the time you're coming from, I'm sorry to say this, but if you're coming from where I grew up, your thinking is only narrow as where you are, right? So it's very hard sometimes to broaden your horizon in terms of your thinking and stuff. So getting exposed to that environment where everyone is thinking, I want to be a doctor, or I want to do this with my life, or I want to do this with my life, you get inspired. It's very hard for you not to get inspired. If you're not, then there's something wrong with you, you know? So for me, that was a foundation. And I think PMP also, which where you and I met, I think played a very huge role, being in that position, because from there are a lot of life skills that you learn. You know, and I remember always saying to people, I want to be a person where I'm wearing suits every day. I remember saying that, and everyone thought, oh, this guy is crazy. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that's where the foundation got laid. I think those years was me putting down the foundation block by block.
And those were not easy years.
Yeah, it wasn't. Like, I mean, like you 1,000 Ks away from home for the first time. At the beginning, it's always interesting, right? Because initially, you wanted to be away from home and go study far from home so you can have, because you're a teenager. I was still a teenager at that time, right? So I wanted to explore. I wanted to learn a lot about myself as well. And I think university gives you that opportunity to do that. That's why I always say to people, go to university or at an institution of higher learning. But that's where you get to explore yourself. That's where you get to explore it, but at the same time, learn a lot about yourself. The fact that my mother was not next to me, the fact that my brother was not next to me, the fact that my family was not next to me, I had to be my own person. That taught you a lot that taught me a lot of lessons, being independent, but at the same time, understanding that being independent actually comes with a lot of responsibilities as well. No one pushes you to go to a lecture or to attend lectures. You can wake up in the morning and be like, actually, I don't feel like attending any class today. But then you're like, well, if I don't attend classes, then how am I going to pass this degree? So there's a lot of ups and downs. There's failing as well. That's part of exploring and it's part of learning. You make mistakes along the way, but you learn from them. I think the most important thing for me is make a mistake and you learn from them and you move on. It's part of being a teenager at uni, and especially for someone like me who attended, so you may say, a township school. Now all of a sudden being in a position where you're listening to someone and who's teaching you, but there's a big board in front of you, whiteboard in front of you, there's a projector, everything is there, and you're like, what is going on? What is going on here? You know what I mean? And the room is full of 100 people. Everyone is trying to be like, oh, this or that. You're like, what is going on? So it's a culture shock at the same time. I think that's the word that I'm probably looking for. It's a culture shock for someone who was coming from a township school, where we used to close windows in winter with our own bags because it was too cold, where we used to close the classroom's door with bricks because the door couldn't close, and then from that position to be then taught in such a big prestige university like that, it's a culture shock. And the fact that now I have to study textbooks that are bigger than my hand, it's a culture shock, right? But yeah, that's part of learning, right? That's why I'm saying that university for me is a platform where people explore themselves, like who they are, identify who they are, their interests. Because as you grow up, a lot of interest and a lot of passion changes. And I think for me, that's what university gave me, that opportunity to actually grow as a person.
All right, so after setting yourself up for a chance, you got to experience the working at Bowmans.
Yeah.
How was that experience?
That experience, and again, I think I'll keep on using the word culture shock. And the reason why I keep using that word is that it's a shock to the system, right? And in a good way, right? Because all of a sudden, for the past 4 years, you've been attending classes, you've been learning the theory behind law, the case law, and all these things. But now all of a sudden, you are put in a position whereby you need to make a decision whether someone has a right to buy the shares or has a right towards the shares. Or now all of a sudden you have to draft a contract. You did contract of law at school, but then it's a whole different ball game where you now have to sit down there and draft a 200-page loan agreement. Or now all of a sudden there's a person who was dismissed at work. Then now you're representing the employer, and you find that probably at uni you're like, well, I'm for the employees, right? But now all of a sudden you're being told, well, you need to find ways or make an argument as to why this employer was correct in dismissing his employee. So it's a lot of responsibility as well. But also at the same time, it's that feeling of, wait, let's just put a pause there. Where am I? You are in the middle of a boardroom filled with people who are very like CEOs of companies that are listed on a JSC, and they're asking you, so what do you think about this? What is the law here? You need to advise those people. And there's not even room for you to make any mistakes, because if you get it wrong, then you have cost that company or that person, well, most of the time represented companies, but it's such a big firm. One mistake, you get it wrong, you messed up, right? There's also the reputation of the firm on the line. If you mess it up, you mess it up, right? But also what uni doesn't teach you is the human element that comes with being a lawyer, in the sense that it's a business, right? You're managing people, you're managing clients, right? It's not only about, do you know the law, but also it teaches you that human element to it, that how you deal with clients, how do you take them out for drinks? Uni doesn't teach you that. They don't tell you that, all right? But when you get there, there's drinks, there's social gatherings, there's golf days where these people meet, and if you're not in the forefront of those things, then you don't get to experience that, right? If you're not in the forefront, how do you learn then? That's one of the things that I was like, you need to put yourself in very good positions. Don't be afraid to go for opportunities. And I think most of the time, I was in a situation whereby I was in a culture shock, like, whoa, it's a huge firm, right? You move from being an individual student to being a part of an institution that is probably employing 800 plus lawyers, and you need to navigate yourself around that. It's a huge animal, and I think if you don't have the right people around you in that firm, in that position, it's easy for you to get lost, because there's like 30 plus of you doing articles in the first year. All of a sudden you need to be professional. There are certain words that you can't say, the things that you used to say at uni, this and that, but then you have to be professional on a daily basis. And the thing is, most of the time we always think you can't differentiate between Tshepo, the employee, and Tshepo outside the Bowmans. It's very hard to actually separate those two, because the moment you go out there, you're still Tshepo, the person who's employed at Bowmans. That's another thing that you need to learn. It's like, well, whatever you do outside there can also impact your work. So that was it. It's being put in a position where you're in a position of power, but sometimes if you don't know how to deal with the power, it's easy for you to get it wrong. But at the same time, if you don't work hard, something that uni doesn't teach you, if you don't work hard, people will see through you. And I think for me, the other thing is, some people come in thinking, oh well, I got the best marks at uni, well, this should be easy. People never give themselves enough time to actually say, look here, uni is done. We all have good marks. We all made it here on merit. So therefore, there's something else that I need to do for me to succeed in this place. And that's sometimes a lot of people come in with the mentality like, oh, I know everything. No one can teach me anything, But if you come with that mindset of saying, I don't know anything, I think for me, that's a mindset that I came in with. I said, I don't know anything. Yes, I have the LLB. Yes, they told me that you have articles based on how I performed. But at the end of the day, I still need to perform day one, right? Because all of these people don't know me. They don't care about your marks, because guess what? Everyone has the same marks here. There's 10 of you that has summa cum laude. So what makes you special? So if you're going to come with that mentality, you're probably not going to make it.
All right, so let's talk about making it. Because it's a attorney program that you were on.
Yep.
So what advice would you give to those people who are now busy or thinking about joining firms like that? How did you make it? How were you retained?
I think for me, it was hard work, a lot of hours. Something that uni again doesn't teach you. The number of hours that you will spend at the office is a kind of entertaining. It's a lot. And I think some people, it's especially in the first 6 months, that's where you get to see whether a law firm is for you or not for you. And I think it's okay for you, if it doesn't work out and you don't think that a law firm is for you, it's okay for you to do that, to say that, right? But if you truly want to make it there, I think it's a mentality thing, right? It's confidence, believing in your own skills, right? I'm not saying that all of a sudden, because I'm saying forget about everything that you learned, now all of a sudden forget everything. No. So what I mean about that is that have a mentality where you want to learn and be taught. Because most of the time we come with that mentality like, oh, I know I have an LLB. What are you going to tell me? What are you going to teach me? Right? But forgetting the fact that you have the theory part, right? But you don't have the practice part, right? They may have told you this is how you apply section what of the Constitution, but in practice it probably works different. And they never teach you that. It's all about experience, right? So if you don't allow yourself to be taught, you're going to have an issue. And also it's an attitude thing. If you have a bad attitude, people are not going to want to work with you, because who wants to work with a person who has a bad attitude, right? At the same time, know how to take very good instructions. So if someone is giving you an instruction, write it down. Don't think you're going to get in there and say, when listening to the person. No, because most of the time they're telling you a story, right? They give you a background to the transaction or to the deal that you guys are working on, all right? And most of the time it has been happening for 20 years, right? So you go in there, take notes, take very detailed notes, and don't be afraid at the same time to say to the person, hey, hold on, what did you mean here? What are you saying here? Don't be afraid to ask questions, because that's what excites people. That shows people that you actually want to learn, that you feel that you're interested in learning what is going on in a deal, right? Don't be afraid of that. But at the same time, I think there's hierarchy in law firms, right? You have an associate, you have a senior associate, and you have your partners, right? Don't look down on these people, associate and senior associate, because most of the time people want to jump and work with partners because they think if they work with a partner, then they would have made it. Yeah, sure, it's a plus for you if you are able to work with a partner directly, but at the same time, these people will always have your back because mistakes do happen. So don't look down upon senior associates and associates. Don't go above them. Because guess what? Come performance review 6 months later, who do you think the partners ask for feedback? They ask the associate and senior associates. What are you going to say if you've always looked at them and were like, well, what do they know, right? And most of the time, partners are too busy because what they do is that they focus on the business side of law, right? Where they basically dealing with clients, like trying to get clients out there. Most of the time, they don't have time for you. You don't have time for juniors. Right? So most of the time you work directly with a senior associate and associate. So if you don't have respect for those people and you come with an attitude of, what are you going to tell me? Then you're going to struggle. Because guess what? 6 months down the line, they get feedback from those people. Right? So attitude, hard work, I can't tell you this. Hard work. And I mean when I hard work, I mean like weekends, you want to also work. If you're going to be a type of person that always complains, well, probably law is not for you, unfortunately. But that's the culture, fortunately. Whether you like it or not, you have to put in the hours, right? So you can't be complaining, right? Because everyone is trying to, because at the end of the day, I think most of the time, we forget that we're in a servicing environment. We're servicing clients. So if a client calls a partner or calls an associate or senior associate and says to them, look, I want this thing done by Friday, and they call them on Thursday night, well, tough luck. That's what they want, right? There's an EGM, there's a meeting. The company is having a meeting. What are you going to say? You're going to say to the associate, well, I'm having dinner plans on Friday night. I can't do it. That's what we call an ACLM. That's a career limiting move. You don't do that. We're all tired. Yeah, we get tired. That's the game. Because at the end of the day, if we lose this client is going to go to another firm. That's where your fees are going to. So it's a very competitive environment. So I think for me, it's mental strength. Have a huge mental strength. You're not going to have everything going away. There will be time where you will cry. You will share a tale or two, especially as kind of entertaining. It happens. It happens to the best of us. We've all been there, right? The moments where you feel like, what am I doing here? But I think for me, the most important thing is that cry and pick yourself up and do it again. Because remember, you're still learning. And I think for me, the most important thing is forgive yourself as well. And I think most of the time as kind of entertaining, we always expect that we need to be perfect. Mistakes will happen. Forgive yourself and move forward. Because if you don't forgive yourself, you will continue making the same mistakes. But it's a mental thing, right? If you notice, if you make one mistake, the mistakes never stop happening. That's the funny thing about being in an law firm or in any working environment, I assume. That if you make one mistake, the mistakes don't end, right? So cry if you want to cry. Go to the toilet and cry. Wipe your tears and go back to it and work. I'm telling you, it will pay you off down the line.
All right. So you decided to specialize in finance. Why did you decide to specialize in finance?
I don't even think I decided to specialize in finance. I think it found me. And the reason why I say that is because, when you found your area of practice, you just know it. It's just a feeling. You're like, there's me, all right? I remember when I started uni, all I wanted to do was be an employment lawyer. Being an employment lawyer. That's what has always been my thing, right? But when I go to practice my first rotation, so in 2 years, you rotate 4 times, so 6 months each in each department. So my first rotation was in employment and benefits. So I did it. I liked it. And then from there I went straight to banking and finance. And I just fell in love with it. And funny enough, I didn't even know it existed when I was still at uni. That's the thing. Because at UWC, there was one course, but even then, it doesn't tell you enough that actually there's something called banking and finance. And I think it was only offered in our final year when we were about to leave. They told us the following year they will have banking and finance. But prior to that, I didn't even know anything about banking and finance, that department. I didn't know it existed, right? So when I got to Bowmans, for me it was like, wow, there's something like this in law, you know? So I did my first six months rotation there. And then from there, I changed and I went to M&A for 6 months. And then after that, for my fourth and final one, I decided, no man, let me go back to banking and finance because I feel like I found what I want to do. This is what I love. I enjoy what I'm doing. It makes my blood boil every time someone says banking and finance. You know what I mean? Like a kid. You know, I still feel like a kid whenever someone mentions banking and finance. I'm there, I'm jumping. And people around me know that once I start talking about banking and finance, I won't shut up. Because as I said, it found me. I didn't even know it existed. It just found me. The moment I started doing it, I loved it. And I never looked back from there.
All right, so then after that, your specialization actually, it landed you 6 months at Absa. How did that happen?
So there was a secondment opportunity at Absa in a leverage team. So I went and I did my secondment for 6 months there in the leverage financing team at Absa. It was that's literally how it happened. So what happened is that the bank will say we need someone to come in and work for us for 6 months. Do you guys have anyone within the team? So that's how the conversation starts in the background, right? And then of course your team at Bowmans, my team at Bowmans, then came together and then they chose a junior person because I was still junior at that time. I think I was in my second year as an associate. That's when they chose me out of everyone to say, dude, go represent us there at Absa because you're still employed by Absa, by Bowmans, right? And you're going there to, one of the things that you're going there to do is that you're going to strengthen the relationship, right? You're strengthening the client relationship that we have with Absa, and hopefully that brings more work towards Bowmans, right? But at the same time, you're there to see how the Absa works and what they expect from law firms whenever they engage law firms. So it's you're wearing two caps basically. You're there representing Bowmans, but at the same time, you're there to see how things work from the other side. So yeah, that's how it happened.
All right. So what did you learn at your time in Absa that you didn't learn at Bowman?
So I think it's twofold, right? So you have a law firm, right? Most of the time we get to a point where, especially in banking and finance, we only get involved when the banks or the person who's borrowing the money says, hey guys, by the way, can you guys represent me? Here are the terms of the facility / loan agreement, right? We normally get involved at that stage. It's very rare for us to get involved in, for example, what you call the term sheet stage. So the term sheet is basically a piece of paper. It basically summarizes all the terms, like for example, the number of the amount that you're borrowing, the type of security that the bank will be taking. Because at the end of the day, the bank is taking a risk, right, by giving you this amount of money. And remember, it's corporate financing, so most of the time it's millions and billions, right? So it's a risk that they're taking. So what do they want to do? They want to have comfort that if you fail to pay them back the agreed amount, then they can take their security and basically pay themselves, right? It tells you it tells you a number of years that you need to repay back the loan amount. Right? They say, for example, 5 years. You know, they tell you the interest that you have to pay. They tell you what you can do or you can't do. For example, in that period of time, you can't, for example, acquire another company with that prior consent. So there's a lot of different terms that we as lawyers will then have to turn that into agreements, right? From security agreements to the main document being, most of the time, being the facility agreement / loan agreement, right? So we don't get involved at that stage. We only get involved once they say, here's the term sheet, draft everything, right? But at Absa, you have the opportunity to say, okay, how do you generate a deal? You get exposed to that. How do you generate a deal? But also at the same time, you get a front seat to how banks think when they generate a deal and how they foresee the deal happening and what they expect. And also you get used to the internal policy, right? For example, there are police on sanctions. With all the Russian things happening right now, sanctions are a big thing for banks. Because you want to know whether the person you're giving the money to is not part of any, is not listed on any sanctions. Because the moment you do that, it's a reputation thing on the bank, right? Because now it's going to get out to the news that, oh, hey, this bank is lending money to a person who's actually on a sanctions list. Imagine now Absa or Standard Bank or Investec borrowing money someone who's on the American sanctions list or UK sanctions list who's from Russia. It's a big thing, right? So you get to learn more about that, but at the same time, how do they generate deals? At the same time, you get used to the business guys that actually bring the business bring business or the clients to the bank, right? There's actually people at Absa or every bank in South Africa that actually that sole responsibility is to manage clients' relationship. They go out there and source clients and say, well, we have, at Absa we can give you, want this money? We can give you this, here's our pricing. Okay, Standard Bank is giving you a lower interest rate. Okay, we will beat that. Here's what we offer you, right? So that's how they get clients. And then from there, once the client has agreed to the pricing, what they do, then they then involve their internal legal department and they start drafting a term sheet, right? And then once that is signed and agreed, then they engage law firms. But I think for me that I had to understand, okay, so how do they engage law firms? Who gets to choose which firm gets this job? Now that there I had to put on my Bowman's cap, right? To say, well, okay, so how do they choose which firm does this? You have ENS, you have Cliff Decker, you have Weber Fentel. These are all big firms. So how do they choose? So looking at the process. But at the same time, once the law firm drafted the documents, internally, what is their thinking in terms of the documents, how they review documents, and how they expect certain clauses to be drafted? That for me was a learning curve as well. And what that helps me with is that when I went back to Bowmans, which we'll get to, is that now whenever I get documents from Absa, I know what they need. I know what they expect. I know what type of documents they require. It gives you that front seat to that. So that's what it helped me with. But also I think not thinking like a lawyer. I think for me that was very powerful. Thinking like the client and how the client operates and what they think and how they want things done. For me, if it wasn't that, I probably wouldn't have understood how they work. So for me, I think that's the mindset, giving you the mindset of a client and how they operate as a company. If it wasn't for that secondment, I probably wouldn't have had a much bigger picture than I do right now.
All right. So then you went back to Bowmans after your 6 months. And your time there was brief before you were headhunted by an Australian law firm. So would you please tell us quickly about that, how that happened? How long were you at Bowmans before you were headhunted? So,
funny enough, in the secondment agreement, there was a clause that said I had to go back to Bowmans. So even if Absa wanted to headhunt me, they couldn't within that period, right? So I had to go back to Bowmans. So I went back to Bowmans. And I don't know, I think something in me clicked when I was at Absa. I think I realized how far I can go. But at that point in time, not a lot of people around me were going to work abroad. So for me, it was like, I wonder how that will feel like. And I think that feeling started manifesting within me to say, actually, I want to see how it will look like if I was to go and work abroad, whether it was London or Australia. And at that time, I think I wanted London. I preferred London the most. So I went back to Bowmans, and then the process started there. When I was Bowmans, I think I was back in Bowmans for 3 months, 2 months. And yeah, it took me like 2 months to find a job once I put my CV out there. And after attending interviews and stuff, it took me like 3 months. Then I left in August 2019. That was when I left. Yeah, it was 3 months after I came back from Absa.
Yeah. So So apart from this feeling that you have to leave South Africa and the experience, knowing what you are leaving behind, why did you decide to?
Look, it wasn't an easy decision, I think. I still look back right now and I sometimes ask myself, what was I thinking, right? But yeah, it wasn't an easy decision. I mean, like leaving your loved ones, friends, family, everything in behind and moving to a country or jurisdiction that you know no one. You know, I mean, like it's difficult enough for me to live in Mpumalanga and come all the way to the Western Cape for me to study. But for me to now pack my bags and pack my entire life to move to a different jurisdiction, that was a hard decision. But I think in the long run, I knew the benefits in me doing that. And beside the craving within me of wanting to do it and try it, I think it was also that feeling of, I want to test myself against the best. You know, I want to see whether I can survive or I can do it or I can make it in an international market or in a much bigger banking and finance market, right? Because with all due respect, most of the time it's the US, London, Australia, and South Africa. I would put South Africa as one of the best banking and finance jurisdictions, if you ask me. So that was that as well, like improving my skills as well as a lawyer. Because I think the learning never stops. You forever be learning. I'm still learning at this point in time, even now, right? So it was that. It was a combination of a lot of things. I think it was a combination of wanting to try it out, wanting to stay abroad as well, but also wanting to uplift my skills, but also to just double check my skill level as to can I do it? You know, can I do it? And that's where the journey started.
Okay, so now tell us more about your experience working in a law firm in Australia.
Yeah. So my experience in
Sorry to interrupt. Your experience was in COVID.
Yes.
The majority of your experience. So take us through that.
So how it basically started is that, as we already touched on, is that it was interviews, probably 3-4 interviews with different firms, and I ended up choosing the firm that I worked for the first 18 months when I got to Australia, which was COVID. And funny enough, the thing is, when I got to Australia, COVID was not a thing. It wasn't a thing. At the same time that it wasn't a thing in Australia, in South Africa, where I could see videos of people dancing in clubs, singing COVID songs, you know, making fun of COVID, because we didn't understand what COVID was, but it wasn't in South Africa at the same time. But also we had a lot of myths about what COVID and about it, right? We didn't know enough. So when I got to Australia, it wasn't a thing as well, right? I think it started being a huge thing in the following year around March, when the Prime Minister there President started, basically closed the international borders. No one was coming in, no one was coming out, right? Because of how big the whole thing was. So most of the 6 months of that followed after that, it was in lockdown. We're working from home, literally. Like meetings were being held on Skype, on all these things. But at least I got to meet the team as well. And again, it was a culture shock. Like when we got there, it's a culture shock in terms of like it's a huge firm. Like it's an international firm, right? The team is big. It's 3 times bigger than what I was used to at Bowmans. You know, from having 10 partners or 11 partners in banking and finance to having close to 40 partners. That's a lot of partners. And that tells you how big the team is. And from having 25 plus associates at Bowmans working for banking and finance to having close to 50, more than 50 plus associates. It's a huge team, right? That itself comes with a lot of navigation that you have to do, right? Playing a game again, right? But now you're playing a game at San Siro, you know, moving from playing at FNB Stadium in Joburg, you're now playing a huge game at San Siro. You know what I mean? Big stadium, all cameras on you, right? So learning how to navigate that situation as well require a different me. Right, but also already you come into a team where a lot of people know each other, right? There's a lot of cliques as well. So you also need to penetrate those cliques where you're saying to people, hey, if you have work, give it to me, you know? But at the same time, the lucky thing about banking and finance is that it's skills that you can transfer anyway, right? Banking and finance, you can transfer those skills anyway. Hence, that's why I was like, well, let's go to Australia, let's do it. right? But even going to Australia, if I was to take a step back, going to Australia instead of London, I was like, well, what's going to set me apart, right? Because literally everyone is going to London. 10 years, 15 years down the line, everyone's going to be a London qualified lawyer. What's going to set me apart? Let me go do a jurisdiction that's a bit different to everyone, right? I'll see London later. That was my mentality, right? So that's how I chose to go to Australia. It's a similar jurisdiction to South Africa, right? So from there, it had its ups and downs. I mean, you're in a foreign country, you know no one. You are all alone. It has its ups and downs. The moments where you missed home and you're like, what am I doing here? You have those feelings. So I think most of the time people always think that working abroad is always like soft life, everything is going smoothly. It's not. It requires a lot of work, but at the same time, it requires a lot of support from people, right? So I guess for me, I was also lucky in that front to have a lot of support from people, family and my loved ones and my partner. And I think for me at the same time, that small text saying, how are you doing, dude? Is everything okay there? That for me went a long way, especially during COVID, because during COVID, we were all locked in, right? But also at the same time, locked in a foreign jurisdiction. And even if I wanted to come home, I couldn't, because if I was to say I want to go back to South Africa, I couldn't come back into the country because I'm a visa holder, right? So it has its challenges, but at the same time, I think I was able to see my skill level, because I could now test my skill level against my peers, but now in an international scale, right? But also the transactions, the magnitude of the transactions are now bigger, right? Now from dealing with millions and billions in rands, now you're dealing with thousands of millions of dollars, billion of dollars, right? So the transactional work is like a much bigger scale now. The work, the responsibility that you have are now bigger. Now you're dealing with international companies. That in itself has its own pressure, So yeah, that was my experience. And of course, it poses a different jurisdiction. There are different, I guess, the way that you argue a clause, or it's a bit different, right? Because now you're in Australia or you're in the Asian Pacific market. There are certain things that in South Africa you wouldn't focus much on that are more important there because of where you are, right? But also at the same time, there are things there that are like, well, we don't need to argue about this, it's a done deal. Where in South Africa, we will have lawyers in boardrooms fighting over this clause because it's so important in the context of being in Africa or being in South Africa, right? So that was experience as well.
All right, so I think there's 2 questions left that I have for you. The one is, I think the second last one is, how do you go about practicing law in Australia? I think many people have asked you that question.
Yeah. So it's very interesting, right? So for me, I think what I always want to say to people is that if you want to work abroad, go on LinkedIn. There's recruiters every day looking for people, especially right now that the market has opened. So what it does is that there's one of the good things I think, one of the few, if the only good thing that came out of COVID is that what happened is that a lot of people within COVID decided to go back home. For example, all the London lawyers that were in Australia decided to pick that back and like, to hell with this, we're moving back home, right? And what that does is that it left Australia with a lot of spaces to fill, right? With talent. Like they had a situation now that the market is opened. Everyone is looking for someone, right? So if you want to work abroad, do it right now. There's literally probably someone that I know moving somewhere every month. That's how open the market is. So get yourself out there, prepare your CV, put it out there, look for recruiters on LinkedIn. They will take your CV, then put it in the right places where you want them to take your CV. And from there, whoever's interested in you, they will then invite you for interviews, right? Don't think or don't stress about, I need to be a qualified lawyer in Australia. No, you don't have to. As long as you're a qualified lawyer in South Africa, apply, go work there. You will definitely work there. I started working and I was only qualified as a South African lawyer. So what they do is that in your email signature, what they'll say, Tshepo Twala and in brackets, admitted in South Africa, but not in Australia, right? So what they do is that, in contract of employment, they put a clause of like saying you need to be admitted as an Australian lawyer within 2 years of starting your employment, right? So that's a different process, right? But don't let that hold you. I went to Australia, I was only a South African qualified lawyer. You are able to work abroad. A lot of people, whether you're moving to London or the US or wherever, you can do it, right? So I started the process of wanting to be admitted as a lawyer or a solicitor in Australia probably like 2 years ago when I got there. So what you do is that once you're there, you're working, you apply to their law society board, right, where they assess your qualification, your degree, right? So what you do is it's like applying to the High Court for admission as a lawyer in South Africa. There's documents that you submit, right? It's your copy of your degree, an affidavit basically saying that these are the modules that you did at the high school, at uni, sorry. And then assess your qualification. And then what needs to happen, basically they're looking at what you did at uni against what is equivalent to what they require their students to do at uni in Australia, all right? And whatever difference, then they will ask you to do those modules at uni in Australia. So most of the time, if you're a South African qualified lawyer, most of the time they give you like 4 modules to do. So I got 4 modules to do. They gave me property law, because property law, of course, is different, even though I did it at universities in South Africa. It's a bit different, right? Property law is different everywhere. So I did that. They have a different legal system called, jurisprudence called equity law, right? So I did that as well. I did ethics, and then they gave me constitutional law, right? Because I'm coming from a republic, and they are a federal state, so it's very different, right? How the constitution is drafted is different to ours. They have the Queen who's in London, the England UK Queen, who's the head of government, right? And that's hence also you have the Prime Minister while we have a president. So they have a federal system where Western Cape it's a country of its own, if you want to say like that, in a sense that Western Cape can actually pass laws that only apply in Western Cape, right? So you have to learn about that, right? Federal government and state government, right? That's how it's divided in Australia. So I did those 4 modules, completed them last year. And then on top of that, you have to do PLT. So PLT, you do it everywhere. So because I already done it in South Africa, I also again had to apply for what you call an exemption. To say, hey guys, I actually don't have to do all of these PLT classes that you guys want me to do, because I've already done them in South Africa, right? So from there, they only gave me 1 module to do PLT on, and that was property of law, and which I've completed. And from there, then you apply to the High Court in Australia for admission, which I've done, and I have my admission date coming up next month. So yes, so that's a whole process. That's the process that you go through in being admitted as a lawyer in Australia. So don't stress about that. Just go do it.
Yeah. So congratulations on the admittance to come. That is big, man. That is big, and it's no easy feat.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Especially remember you're juggling books with working. I remember this one time, I think we were doing an assignment, and I think we submitted an assignment, I think 5 minutes to the deadline. That's how stressful it was. Like it was due at midnight, 12 midnight. And it was literally 23:55 when I submitted my assignment. Well, you couldn't do it during the day, right? Because you're stressing with work, right? So that's the stress. I'm just like, that's why I did 2 per semester, because I didn't want to stress myself. And even looking back right now, I think I should have done 1 per semester actually. But it's very stressful. It's very stressful, but possible.
Yeah. So the final question that I have for you is future aspirations. What are your future aspirations?
It's a good question. I always thought that making it to Australia, I will stop having goals, but it doesn't stop there. But at the same time, getting admitted was my goal. Then now that I'm probably like 2 days from achieving it, then I'm like, what's next? You're always going to constantly have those questions, what's next? I think for me, currently, I'm happy and comfortable with being in Australia, continuing to upskill my skills in Australia, and still learning. Because right now I'm also in a different, I'm still in banking and finance, but on top of what I already have done in South Africa and in Australia, I'm now doing a new financing in Australia, which is aircraft financing, which I never knew existed as well, right? Where, for example, SAA wants to wants a new aircraft, right? Because maybe there's a shortage of them, right? What they do is that they probably find an Boeing aircraft from a Japanese entity, and they're like, dude, can we lease this aircraft from you? There's a lot of legalities that goes behind that, right? Or are you leasing or buying the aircraft, right? So there's always financing everywhere. I always say to people, wherever you're buying something or whatever something is happening, there's always financing, and that's where I get in, right? So I'm doing aircraft financing, and I'm finding it very interesting. I didn't know it existed, right? But now I'm in a niche area and when I look back in South Africa, there's not a lot of aircraft financing lawyers going around, right? So now imagine whenever I decided to come back to South Africa, now I'm going to have those skills, right, that I didn't have, right? If there's any aircraft financing happening in South Africa, I'm going to be that guy, right? But at the same time, right now I'm thinking admitted in South Africa, admitted in Australia. And now I think about it, if I was to get admitted in 2 or 1 more jurisdiction, think about it. And think about the business side of it, right? Because now I'm in a position where I can say, okay, there's an English law translation that's coming in. I'm going to be able to do it. Why? Because now Australia and the UK have a treaty in place that says that every qualified Australian lawyer can practice as a solicitor or as a lawyer in the UK. You don't need to qualify in the UK. Same with the UK lawyers, they can do the same thing. Because before then, they had to qualify, right? But now it's like, dude, you might as well. The systems are almost the same. Why do we have to push you guys through that? So come practice as a lawyer here. If you want to do an Australian deal, come. I'll do it for you. If you want to do a South African deal, I'll do it for you, right? And now if I add another jurisdiction, which I definitely probably will, it's definitely not London. I don't want to reveal a lot, but definitely not London at this point in time. I'll say London probably later on, down the line. But there's a jurisdiction that I want to do. Now, imagine now South Africa, Australia, and that jurisdiction. Imagine a business case I will have coming back to South Africa. If I decide to come back to a firm in South Africa. Now imagine the business side of that. Because right now, I think most of the time, as junior lawyers or people in my PQE, we don't think about those things, right? We always think about, I need to do this, I need to draft this, I need to learn this. But at the same time, give yourself an opportunity to think about the business side. If you really want to be in law and you want to be in private practice, think about your business case, right? In a sense that how does your business case look like? Right now, my business case looks like South African clients, looks like Asian Pacific clients, looks like English law clients. Now, if you add another jurisdiction, that's another jurisdiction that I can be like, I can have my hands on, right? Any firm, I hope, will go crazy in having me. I can only hope. But even if not, that's the case. Even if I decide to go in-house, I mean, like the amount of experience that I will bring, I think that's what I'm aiming for right now.
All right, Tshepo, my brother, my friend, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
For this, and I'm certain that this conversation will be cherished by many people, and it will be cherished outside law.
Yeah.
Because I think the fundamental thing that you, kind of lesson that you're giving us today is have a plan.
Yeah.
Vision, and work hard.
Yeah.
And don't stop working.
Yeah. And don't give up.
Exactly. And once you achieve that,
continue going. Yeah. Always ask your why always has to be bigger. Your why is very important. I think if you don't have a plan, you will just go through life as if like you always ask yourself what's next. Because I always constantly ask myself what's next. What can I do to improve myself? What is it that I can do to make myself different from the rest? Because at the end of the day, like everyone is doing law, right? There's so many of us that are going to London. There's so many of us that are also in Australia. So in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, what's going to set me apart? What's going to set me apart? And I think for me, don't ever stop dreaming. I think that's the most important thing. Don't ever stop dreaming. If you think working in Australia is a big thing or working in London is a big thing, it's not. There's so much you can still do out there.
Thank you, man.
No, thank you, Jack.